Okay, so this is going to be my recap of Alias Grace Part 4. So, Grace arrives for her 4th session, interrupting yet another dream that Dr. Jordan is having, inappropriate dream that Dr. Jordan is having of him and Grace. And he brings up McDermott's confession a number of times in this episode. This time, his confession basically painted Grace out to be jealous of Nancy.
He says Grace was very jealous of the difference made between her and the housekeeper whom she hated.
And she kind of saw her, paint her as being resentful of the fact that Nancy thought that she was better than them.
She's not better born than we are, or better educated.
And so, of course, when he asked her, like, what was her response to that, and Grace basically said that it's not polite to laugh at the dead. And so, basically, she really didn't think anything of it, really. And so, Kinnear was having some of his friends over, and Nancy asked Grace to ask Dermot to prepare some of the chickens for them to cook for the dinner. And so she went out to look for McDermott, couldn't find McDermott anywhere. And so she ended up telling Nancy, and Nancy told her that then she was end up having to kill the chicken. Grace could not bring herself to do it. And then it's like I said, this Jekyll and Hyde thing that Nancy has when dealing with Grace. She basically pushed her out of the house, physically pushed her, and basically told her to go and kill the chicken.
Nancy, I cannot bear the thought of it. Don't come back without a dead bird.
Luckily, Jamie came to her rescue, and he did the hard part for her, and then he, kind of helped her pluck the chicken. Now, Nancy and Grace are preparing dinner, and now all of a sudden, Nancy's trying to have this conversation with her like they girlfriends, like, oh, so like, what's going on with you and Jamie?
See, you've made a conquest.
What do you mean?
Jamie Walsh. He has a bad case of puppy love.
So it's time for the dinner. Grace is refilling the wine, and you can see that Nancy feels some kind of way that she's being kind of left out of the conversation because it's all men, right? And so, of course, Grace goes in to refill the glasses, and of course, the inappropriate comments ensue. So one asked Kinnear where if he had more like Grace, and are they? What do you say? His word was ripe.
Where did you find this one, Tom? Any more growing on the tree where she came from, and if so, are they ripe yet?
And then the other man said, well, you should be careful how you look at Kinnear, because Nancy basically painted Nancy out to be jealous, and she could probably, hurt Grace if she wasn't careful.
Take a look to your fine blue eyes, my dear. Nancy might scratch them out if old Tom so much as looks at you sideways. So
the next day they're at church, and of course people are staring and whispering. And Nancy got uncomfortable and just basically said, I think let's just leave. And so they left, and they went back to the house. And so Nancy's already in a bad mood. So she runs into McDermott and basically asks him where he was. And, he got mad that she was questioning him, a woman questioning him. And she basically said that we needed you and you disappeared. And he was like, well, how am I supposed to know? So she basically told him that, what we do know is that at the end of the month you're leaving. She basically fired him.
How was I supposed to know? I can't read the future.
If you could, you would see you will not spend much more of it in this house. You shall leave at the end of the month.
So later that day, Grace is in the kitchen preparing something. He walked in and basically said that he's glad to be leaving because he's tired of being ordered around by a woman. And then he basically said made some comment about, the type of woman that Nancy is.
That's much worse considering what type of woman she is. I don't care to stay a moment longer with such a parcel of whores.
And of course, Grace being innocent, she was like, what are you talking about? And then he basically told her that you can't be this dense. Like, that Nancy and Kinnear are have a relationship.
Do you not know that Nancy and Mr. Kinnear sleep together?
And of course, Grace didn't believe him. And he basically said that Nancy, the house where she used to work, she ended up having a situation with, I don't know if it was another guy that worked there, or if it was somebody in the family, but she ended up getting pregnant. She lost the baby. And Kinnear took her in, which no respectable man would have done. And the only reason he took her in was because she was already disgraced, and that basically he could have his way with her. And so, of course, Grace was pissed off, and she, felt some kind of way. And then eventually she had to admit that she started to realize that he was telling her the truth. So Grace got upset. She was feeling some kind of way, and Nancy came in while Grace was cleaning the floor and made some comment. Grace got upset and basically said, since you complain about everything that I do, why don't you do it yourself? So Nancy got upset and she ended up slapping Grace for her insolence and walked away.
And I've been down in that fine dress.
How dare you?
How dare I what?
So later that night, it's dinner time, and of course Dermot and Grace are having dinner in the kitchen as they always do. And he basically told them that they need to stick together and then they need to demand their rights. And then he told her that he knows that Grace is going to try to that Nancy's going to try to get rid of him before the month is up and not pay him.
Nancy plans to turn me away before the month is up and to withhold my wages.
And then according to, this is all Grace's account. And so now this is when she's saying that this is when McDermott said that he should knock them in the head and throw them down the cellar.
They deserve to be knocked on the head and thrown down the cellar. Both of them.
So, we get back to her talking to the doctor, and the doctor is basically saying that McDermott basically was saying that it was your fault, that it was your idea, and that you said that you would put poison in their food or something to that effect.
He claimed that you intended to murder Nancy and Mr. Kinnear by putting poison in their porridge.
And of course, Grace denied this. So we go back to the story, and now it's Grace's birthday. And it was so kind of cute. So Nancy ended up giving her the morning off, and so she had some time to herself. And so then Jamie found her. She was kind of sitting in the woods, and her and Dr. Jordan had some conversation about loneliness. He had asked her about the time that she felt lonely in the house, and she basically said that on her birthday because she didn't have any friends. And so Jamie popped up and gave her some flowers for her birthday, and then actually proposed to her.
I would like to be your sweetheart. And when I'm older and have saved the money for it, we will be married.
And she politely let him down, basically told him that she'd think about it, and went on with their day. So Jeremiah arrived, and it was her birthday, and he basically said that he was going to give up peddling and go into a new venture, becoming a hypnotist.
I wanted to celebrate the end of my life as a peddler with you.
Are you no longer a peddler?
Not after today. I'm going to be a hypnotist.
He asked her if she was happy. And then he, voiced his concerns about Kinnear, because he said word around town is that Kinnear has a taste for servant girls.
They say in the neighborhood he has a hankering for servant girls.
And then he told her, you do know that Nancy was once his servant, and, before they started their relationship. And, of course, Grace in her naive way said, no, I didn't know that.
You know that Nancy was the servant of this household not so long ago.
And so he basically asked her to come away with him. And Nancy, started thinking about Mary, and so she ended up asking him, so are we going to get married? And he basically told her, well, why would we need to do that?
Would we be married then?
What would be the need of that?
And so that kind of made her feel some kind of way. And so he told her to, think about it, and that he'll be back through, and, she can give him her answer. So, a few days later, Kinnear came into the kitchen and he wanted Grace to make him a cup of coffee. And so she had to get the stove together. He had asked what Nancy was, and Nancy was sick. She had been sick for a while. She even looked sickly. And so he asked her if she could make the coffee, and she did. So while she was making the coffee, Nancy came down and asked her why she was lighting the stove, and she said something about the coffee. And she was like, well, why would he ask you? Why didn't he ask me? She was like, oh, well, I told him that you were, weren't feeling well, and he just asked me to make the coffee. So she said that she would take the coffee into him. And so as she was about to leave the kitchen, she ended up throwing up, basically, and then telling Grace to clean it up. So at this point, we know that Nancy is with child. So later that night, Nancy's on her way to, Grace is on her way to her room, but she can hear Nancy in with Kinnear. And they're talking, and she basically, Nancy's telling him that she already told, McDermott that he would leave at the end of the month. And then she said she's thinking about getting rid of Grace too.
Grace is quick and tidy about her work, but lately she's become very quarrelsome.
And so Grace had a weird dream that night where she basically had this run-in with all the men in her life that had caused her some type of discomfort. And so first it was McDermott, and then she kind of moved from McDermott to George, and then from George to Kinnear. And then that particular interaction with her dad was weird. And then, she got to this tree where it looked like it was headless angels in the tree. And, it was kind of odd. So she woke up the next morning and got out of bed and realized that her feet was dirty. So she had actually been sleepwalking, and what she realized when she went out that morning was that it was the laundry that had blown into the trees that created those shapes. And so that's pretty much how this episode ends.